Dragon's Dogma 2 is now out, and there was a lot of excitement leading up to the release of this game, especially if you were a fan of the first one. I think there has been reasonable doubt, and most people figured, really, that there wouldn't be a big-budget sequel in mind, mostly because of the time between the original release and now the new one. So, obviously, there's a lot of excitement to see Capcom continue on with the franchise. Well, we seem to have run into a bit of a snag here, and it's not actually a new thing for Capcom. Technically, it's something they've been doing for a while now, but finally we're starting to see some people realize that Capcom's been doing quite a bit when it comes to microtransactions, DRM, and kind of locking things down when it comes to the mod scene, specifically to work into, yes, selling more stuff to you after the initial, in this case, $70. But there was something else that I noticed here, really when it comes to just microtransactions in general, and kind of the conditioning over it with microtransactions in mind for the last decade or so, and I wanted to go over that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button, and subscribe if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel. So first of all, the microtransactions did technically get added into the game after reviews went live. However, Jez Corden did point this out, saying that, just wanted to add that these microtransactions were detailed in the initial review guide, which didn't read as to avoid spoilers that might impact my review impressions. Ironic. Well, what ends up happening, again, I don't review a bunch of games, but at times I will at least give some of my thoughts and impressions on different titles if maybe I'm able to get it ahead of time from a publisher and it's a game that I'm interested in. So, good example would be Prince of Persia. We had that recent one that came out, The Lost Crown, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. They did have like basically a pamphlet you can think of where it kind of goes over some of the history around the game, some important details. It is a reviewer's guide, essentially, and in this case, Capcom did one for Dragon's Dogma 2, which makes sense. Big release. Want to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page when it comes to maybe the lore, some of the mechanics, or other things they might have questions for. It's a good way to just kind of push that out there, and of course, reviewers can look over it maybe to get answers themselves from it. But technically, if you don't go over it, then yes, it's going to catch you off guard when they add the microtransactions that were technically detailed, which is interesting because I don't think any reviews necessarily mention the idea of microtransactions. So maybe it was on page like 62 or something of 70. Who knows? But what we're dealing with here are a number of microtransactions, which we can see here for Dragon's Dogma 2. A couple of these have really caught the eye of gamers, specifically ones that have to do with character editing, the idea of fast traveling or warping around the map. And, I mean, you can see the prices next to it. These all add up, if you get everything here, to just over $41. And when you see things like warp location marker, these port crystals coming in at $3, it's like, oh, wow, it's interesting that we have to pay for that. Now, I do want to point out, as many people have, these different items you technically unlock in the game. Like, all this stuff is attainable in-game to varying degrees. Some of them, yes, are going to be more rare than others, but yes, if you play enough, you can just get these different items. And they also have, you can see, the different rift crystals here, so you can basically just buy currency with actual money. Over on Steam, Dragon's Dogma 2 is getting absolutely crushed with mostly negative for the reviews, and unfortunately I haven't had a chance to play Dragon's Dogma 2 at this time, so I don't necessarily know how difficult it is to get some of the stuff on that list. I have seen different extremes being touted on Twitter, where there's people are saying these are incredibly rare, others saying after you get to the first town you can buy some of this stuff, others saying, oh, when you start renting out your pawns you'll get all kinds of currency. You won't even think about these microtransactions. So I'll have to get the game and kind of experience it for myself to have, I think, just a better overall opinion on how impactful some of these microtransactions really are. And as I mentioned, not a new concept for Capcom, even when it comes to full-price games, in this case 70, but also games like Devil May Cry 5. That was an entire thing where you could buy just orbs, just outright. You just throw them some money. I mean, look at all the content for this game, which, I mean, like, the original soundtrack is lumped in there, sure, but if you bought everything on this list, $142. And the thing with a game like this, Devil May Cry 5, single-player game, maybe you're someone who just wants to fast track your way through, and yes, you can throw money at it and get done quicker. You can upgrade things right away, but that does also bring up the question of how fun is the game actually if there is some sort of grind that has things like red orbs linked to it. I played through Devil May Cry 5, did not buy any extra orbs or anything, and I had a good time with it. But you look at something like Dragon's Dogma 2, and it gets a little bit of out of the realm of just currency. I mean, it's there are questions around the idea of making additional characters, re-rolling really, because it is linked to Capcom servers. It doesn't actually exist on your computer, which then brings in the whole thing around DRM and why Capcom is pretty much against all mods for their titles. Well, when you're doing stuff like this, yeah, you don't want people messing with the game files and even using cheat codes, which that used to be a thing back in the day that I feel like younger gamers now have no idea ever existed, where you would write down up, down, left, right, circle, square, or something with a PlayStation 2 game, and that way you can unlock infinite money. Well, now it's a bit easier to technically charge for it. Now, again, Capcom has done this with a lot of titles. Resident Evil 4 Remake is the one that I was a little surprised with, not necessarily because Capcom did it, but because I just didn't hear a lot of pushback around it. Like, the Dragon's Dogma 2 stuff is much louder online right now. I just don't remember people saying things about Resident Evil 4 Remake to this degree. I mean, look, you can just buy upgrade tickets like across the board, a whole bunch of them. And again, they have other things like the original soundtrack in here, but you start adding all this stuff up, it's like $120. This is something Capcom has consistently done. The funniest one, though, is Monster Hunter Rise's list is ridiculous. It's 252 items. Yes, there are a lot of things that are armor sets and pieces and cosmetics, but still, it's like, jeez, the list of DLC is almost overwhelming here. Capcom did actually respond to some of the discourse here over on Steam with an update with paid DLC. All the items listed below can be obtained in-game or as paid DLC items. So they have like the character editor, the change pawn inclinations, warp location marker, rift crystals. Yes, technically you can go through, play the game, and get all these things. But if this is unnecessary, technically, and that's one of the biggest things I see online, look, we're in a position where I feel like we've become very conditioned to just expect microtransactions that you kind of start to come up with reasons as to why it's not necessarily an issue, as opposed to just, I feel like 5 or 6 years ago, there was a ton of pushback around anything like this. I mean, really go back to the days of horse armor, that was a big thing. And now we're to the point where we have 200 some odd items in certain games that can be purchased separately after you buy the game. And like I said, like, many of those things were either just there as unlockables in games for completing different tasks and objectives, or just outright cheat codes. So it's just kind of interesting to me how things have altered in just 5 or 6 years. It makes me wonder what will be even 5 or 6 years from now and what's more acceptable. I mean, people have mentioned this sets a bad precedent. Guys, we're already there. There is no more precedent to set. Like, this is just kind of how it is. And it is interesting. I feel like most people have that game in mind where if maybe there's a series that you really like, it's a franchise, it's an older one, it hasn't had a game in 10 or 15 years, and you're thinking, it's probably never going to happen, but if it did, it would be an incredible thing. Well, if that company came to you and said, listen, we can make this game, we can revive this franchise that you absolutely love, but it has to come with microtransactions of some kind that maybe are optional like this, I feel like many people would say, okay, that's fine, let's do it. So I do wonder if we have that right now with Dragon's Dogma 2, where there are people who are just very excited about the game, and they're like, look, I got Dragon's Dogma 2. I'll live with being able to buy Rift Crystals separately. Which, hey, in and of itself, not a new concept from Capcom. Let's go back to the original PlayStation 3 and 360 releases of Dragon's Dogma before they went to Dark Arisen and before it released on PC. People recently realized, as much as like 11 months ago, that you could actually buy Rift Crystals as microtransactions with that original release. Eventually they did remove it, but apparently, and I can't confirm this, maybe someone out there who's watching this video can, and let me know down in the comments, it's still enabled for the PlayStation 3 version of the original Dragon's Dogma. So I don't have the game, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to boot it up and check the main menu. I have it right now on the Xbox 360. I think I have the original on the 360, but not the PlayStation 3. So this isn't new for the Dragon's Dogma franchise at all. Now, again, if you're coming to Dragon's Dogma 2 without really playing the original first one, and I'm sure there are many people who just did Dark Arisen and like, okay, this is cool, I'll look forward to the sequel. Yeah, this is kind of a splash of cold water. The part that I think is the real shame right now is that the issues that people should be talking about is for performance. Like, the game itself just struggles across the board on any platform. PlayStation, Xbox, PC, it doesn't matter. It's just, you're not getting a very good experience 99% of the time. Sure, there is probably the 1% of the user base out there that has just incredible build for PC that does happen to get 80 frames per second out of this game. But for the most part, people are experiencing all kinds of issues with crashing, poor performance in terms of frame rate, terrible looking textures. It's just, I mean, it's all over the place right now. And for the most part now, what I see online is just discussion over microtransactions that people seem to be saying aren't even necessarily important enough to have in the game or offer in the first place. It does also make me wonder if we're starting to see some of the limits for RE Engine, specifically in an open world setting like this. I know that there is a lot going on in the background with the NPCs, the different enemies you're finding in the world in terms of physics, and it is very, very reliant on the CPU specifically. But the RE Engine has done really, really well, and it's done impressive things in terms of performance and visuals with certain games like Resident Evil, especially a lot of the remakes. We even saw it adapted to 2D with, Ghosts and Goblins. And for the most part, it's been awesome up until now. So maybe this is the limitation as far as this thing can go. Once you get out of the confines of the more linear or controlled style, it's downright unplayable for many people out there right now. And at the end of the day, I don't think Capcom is going to stop what they've been doing when it comes to single player games and having these microtransactions attached to it. Maybe it's because of them kind of building up this goodwill with what have been really good releases back to back to back to back. And typically, if you just make a good game, yeah, you can get away with some of this stuff. But it does also make me think about Konami when they did Metal Gear Survive. And, you know, there were some things people looked at and said, that seems strange, like having to pay for extra character save slots. That was a really big problem. I mean, they got absolutely crushed over that. But it was Konami, so I feel like that's a company that people have no problem doing that to, whereas right now Capcom, it's like, no, it's okay. It's optional. It's just kind of interesting, again, to see where we really started with the whole microtransaction DLC thing and where we are now. Just, I mean, after Horse Armor, it's been, like 17, 18 years or something. It's been a while, but I don't know if it's been long enough to get to really where we are now when it comes to the acceptance of microtransactions in some of these full price games. But I'm curious what people out there think when it comes to some of these conversations, especially in full price $70 games, and technically it not being multiplayer and these things being optional. I mean, you could just play all the way through Dragon's Dogma 2 and not even realize that there were microtransactions. So in that case, does it really bother you if it's available, considering you can just kind of ignore it completely if you want? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.